So we need to talk about the New York Knicks, a team that finished second in the East last season, played well in the playoffs until they came up short, mainly due to injuries in the second round against the Pacers, a team that understood that regardless of their success last season, decided to go all in by making two of the biggest trades of the offseason, mortgaging most of their future for Mikal Bridges and Karl-Anthony Towns, keeping their core intact, but also breaking up some of the pieces that made their identity what it was and moving on from Donte DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, as well as letting Isaiah Hartenstein go in free agency. But all-in moves to put them over the top in bringing a title back to the city of New York in search of the Knicks' first title in over 50 years, or so they thought anyway. Because in the early going of the season, this team has looked far worse than what most people would have anticipated. A team that in the early stages has struggled to form an identity and at times has looked lost on the defensive end, which is always surprising for a team that is coached by Tom Thibodeau, who is one of the better defensive minds in the game of basketball. And while it is early in the season, it is still a small sample size, especially for a somewhat newly constructed roster that had little time to bond and form some chemistry when the trade for Cat happened just a few weeks before training camp. But already, we're starting to see some concerning trends for the Knicks from a team that had championship aspirations going into this year. So let's talk about it. As always, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, and in return, I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, over the years, it's been easy to make fun of the Knicks. Oftentimes, they're considered the laughingstock of the NBA from the last 20 years, a team that won one playoff series from the year 2000 to 2022. The biggest market in the league, a team that plays in the mecca of basketball at Madison Square Garden, but always seem to make some of the worst decisions for their franchise's future. Busted draft picks, poor trades, overpaying free agents who seemed to fall off after they arrived. Nothing had worked for the Knicks despite being a destination that you would think teams would want to play for. But more recently, that narrative of the Knicks being a disaster of a franchise has turned around, making sound decisions, aggressive trades, and free agency signings that have bolstered their roster and actually putting them in a place to contend. Maybe not title favorites, but a relevant franchise once again, and a team that was on their way to contention. Signing Jalen Brunson, an acquisition that most people thought the Knicks overpaid for, and signing an undersized guard who can't play defense to a $100+ million deal, that contract ended up becoming a bargain, with Brunson far exceeding expectations and outplaying that contract. Trading for OG Anunoby, who in my view they got at a great value, knowing the Raptors had very little leverage of being able to retain him. Signing Donte DiVincenzo, who some thought was an overpay by the Knicks after his prior season with the Warriors, ends up becoming a piece in the starting lineup, fitting incredibly well in their system and having one of the best seasons of his career. The Knicks went from being one of the worst offensive teams in the league, 22nd in the NBA in the 22-23 season, to 7th the following year, and finishing with 50 wins on the season for the first time in over a decade. But here's the thing. The Knicks might have gotten a little too aggressive after smelling their first taste of real success in years and made some moves that, in theory, should make their team better, but what they failed to consider is the fit on the team as well as the depth which they have sacrificed over the last two seasons in trading most of their role players for these bigger names. Fit, chemistry, and identity is so important in the NBA. You can have one of the most talented players in the league on your roster, and while they're going to win a handful of games, you're going to go through a host of challenges along the way and ultimately not be in a position to truly contend for a title. The Knicks failed to consider that as great of a player as Karl-Anthony Towns is, a big they absolutely needed after Isaiah Hartenstein left in free agency and Mitchell Robinson went down due to injury, the Knicks have now run into the cat problem that the Timberwolves had. A player you need for his offensive prowess as a legit stretch five that can crash the boards, but is an absolute liability on the defensive end, so bad that it's near impossible to hide his defensive deficiencies even when you surround him by some of the best defenders in the game. Rudy Gobert was the defensive player of the year last year, and even he couldn't make up for Cat's lack of defense. OG Anunoby and Josh Hart are both incredible defenders. Mikal Bridges is a solid defender as well, but so far, it hasn't done much in masking Cat's weaknesses on the defensive end. I saw a mind-blowing stat where Karl-Anthony Towns is allowing his opponents to shoot 91% in the restricted area when they're being defended by him. That means if you're getting the ball in the paint and you're posting up on Cat, you have about a 90% chance to score on this guy. I saw this firsthand the other night when the Bulls came to town and when the Knicks started making a run and coming back into the game. The Bulls, instead of going to their outside game, which had worked well for them in that matchup, just kept attacking the basket, going at Cat, and it worked damn near every time. Now, you can't just put this all on Karl-Anthony Towns because Jalen Brunson, who had a stellar season last year, hasn't been as good as we saw last year, compared to what we're seeing this season. And part of that is he hasn't been as efficient on offense, but more importantly, teams have early on figured out how to take advantage of the poor roster construction and duo of Brunson and Cat and going at them on offense. And look, you can see guys like OG and Josh Hart looking visibly upset with Karl-Anthony Towns and Brunson on almost a nightly basis for their lack of effort or help defense. Either they're losing their man off the dribble or they're not coming over to help on mismatches in a timely manner. And because Hart and OG Bridges are always trying to pick up the slack on defense, they're looking gassed out there and at times even looking lost themselves on D, knowing it's more or less a 5-on-3 situation on every possession. And the other big thing that has to be a huge concern for the Knicks in the early going of the season is just how thin their rotation has been. Like, we knew their starting lineup on paper was probably the best in the league, but outside of that, they have absolutely no bench, and it shows when you see Tibbs this early in the season more or less going with a 6 or 7 man rotation. 10 games into the season. The NBA season is a marathon, and Tibbs is already keeping his rotations this short and playing most of his starters 40+ minutes a night. After what happened at the end of last season in the playoffs, where guys were playing so much, Josh Hart playing the full 48 minutes for like 3 games, and the guys falling apart and getting injured in that series against the Pacers, and right away, you're already playing your guys this much in the early going of the season. And look, I get it. You're going to be reluctant to give more minutes to some of your guys off the bench when you look and see who's on the bench, but this isn't sustainable over the course of an 82-game season and the playoffs. And it would be one thing if it was working and you guys were winning, but the Knicks can't even get over 500 right now for a team some thought was going to rival the Celtics this year with all the moves that they made. So no, the Knicks didn't consider depth when it came to their overall roster construction, and they didn't consider the overall fit and makeup of this team with Karl-Anthony Towns joining the fold and taking away the tenacious identity they had last season with guys like Isaiah Hartenstein and Dante DiVincenzo in their rotation. And the thing is, the Knicks kind of have to make this work, because they gave up 5 first-round picks to get Mikal Bridges, which is still absolutely insane to me relative to his value as a player. They gave up a good haul to get Cat while also taking on his Supermax contract. They extended OG Anunoby and Jalen Brunson to massive deals, which again, I like both of those guys, but giving OG Anunoby $250 million is a bit of a stretch. They have a massive amount of money on their payroll for the foreseeable future, and now, after all the trades they've made over the last year and a half, have very little draft capital to work with to even bail themselves out should this experiment not work out. The Knicks must get some strong rotational players, preferably strong defensive players, to round out their roster and give them more depth. Otherwise, I really don't see this core, the core that they have in place today, being built for title contention. That's just my take on the matter, though. Let me know what you guys think on the current and future state of the Knicks. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.